and welcome to Telewizja Republika. We start with the latest on Russian attacks in Ukraine. Over the past day, Russian forces launched drone and missile attacks across multiple regions, resulting in the deaths of at least 4 civilians and injuries to 30 others. In Kharkiv Oblast, a missile strike on the town of Lozova killed 3 people and injured 6. In Odessa, debris from a drone attack injured 2 people. The Kherson region also suffered casualties, with 1 person killed and 6 injured during multiple attacks. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 25 out of 38 Russian Shahid drones targeting infrastructure in regions including Odessa and Kyiv. Next, the US and Canadian Air Forces intercepted 2 Russian Tu-95 and 2 Chinese H-6 military bomber aircrafts in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone. These aircrafts, intercepted by US F-16 and F-35 fighter jets, along with Canadian CF-18 jets, remained in international airspace and did not enter US nor Canadian sovereign airspace. But this maneuver is seen as clear provocation. NORAD will continue to monitor competitors' activity near North America. Romania, as we know, has been on alert as Russian drones have invaded their airspace for the 2nd night in a row. This act of aggression was highlighted yesterday by our guest, Lieutenant Chuck Farrer, in yesterday's episode of our program. The Romanian Air Force has been monitoring those incursions closely. In an exclusive interview for The Guardian, Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Alexander Syrski, discussed the challenges faced by Ukraine. He noted that Russia outguns Ukraine with a significant numerical advantage in troops and equipment. Despite this, Syrski emphasized that Russian losses are 3 times higher than Ukrainian casualties. He also mentioned that while F-16 fighter jets promised by the West will enhance Ukraine's capabilities, they have limitations in proximity to the front lines. If, and that's my comment, they will ever show up over the Ukrainian ground in Ukrainian airspace. You can join us on rackracon.com. You'll find there our Substack account, and you can leave us your email. We'll get back to you with our reports on the ongoing war against the West. I know that we haven't been active there for a while, but you'll know from our discussion with Joe Lindsley what's the reason for which for the last couple of weeks we haven't been active also on Substack. My name is Michał Rachon. This is Rackracon, and we roll in.
Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go!
It's not Monday, however, after a couple of weeks of break, Joe Lindsley is again on Telewizja Republika. Joe, great to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, we decided to take a break during the 2 most calm weeks of American political life. Hello from Kyiv.
Yeah, the reason why we didn't see each other and the reason why we had a brief break in our reports is that we actually have been traveling, and we've been in the U.S. We've been with our crew covering the U.S. presidential campaign. We actually were present in Milwaukee during the Republicans' national convention, and we've been there during the NATO summit. All of those events somehow are connected and very important from the perspective of our main interest and the things that we are following in our conversations with Joe. So since you know very well the American political scene and you very well the American media scene, and for more than 3 years you are watching very closely the Russian invasion and aggression against Ukraine, I wonder, what is your assessment of what we know by now about the stance and positions of both camps on Russian aggression against Ukraine? Because it seems to me that your views are, I would say, unorthodox.
Yes, I would say I get asked this question all the time here in Ukraine, in particular by Ukrainians. And, based on my time in Washington and New York. I was mentored by Roger Ailes, who helped get Nixon and Reagan and others elected. I worked for the War Machine people. I got out of that. And I think the first thing is that it's important that we don't only pay attention to the characters and personalities and names of the candidates. One of the most important things that gets neglected is that no matter who's in the White House, who will be running their policy? Who will the president, he or she, whoever it might be, turn to trust on key policy matters? In this case, particularly about foreign policy and Ukraine. This is crucial. And right now, behind the scenes, while everyone else is simply focused on the personality of, say, Vice President Harris or former President Trump or other people, there's a lot of negotiating and maneuvering behind the scenes within these camps to influence which way such a presidency could go. And so it's very important that I think one of the most important things anyone who cares about Ukraine should be doing now is working to make the case for Ukraine, for freedom, and security to anyone who would influence Harris or Trump. And I think if we look at, for example, when former President Trump picked J.D. Vance as his presidential candidate, all the attention was on Vance as a person. But the more important thing is, why does a president pick a vice president? Usually it's because of the people that vice presidential candidate represents. And Vance represents the people of Ohio. And so if you want to tell the story of Ukraine, if Ukrainians want not only weapons, but crucially, the thing that Biden refuses to do, permission to use them, you need to win the people of Ohio over. You must win over the people of Ohio. And I think if Ukrainians and pro-Ukrainians think of this struggle in terms of a presidential campaign, there's a better chance of victory. And even, for example, in January of this year, J.D. Vance tweeted something in favor of Poland. And we don't even need to go into the details because that's not what's important here. He tweeted something in favor of Poland, and his constituents in Ohio, the people who were very loyal to him, were furious. They responded. There was a mini rebellion on Twitter, on X, and they said, "How dare you talk about Poland and not Ohio?" And this really shows us the mood of people in America who are frustrated.
Let me interrupt you for a second, because this is actually very interesting in the context of thing that is concern of our viewers. Because this X or tweet, whatever we call those X tweets right now, was about Poland. That's true. And the answer, I think that Charlie was the name of the Ohio voter who wrote to J.D. Vance, I remind you that you are a senator of Ohio. And what J.D. Vance answered to this question was explainer why he is addressing Poland and Polish issues on his X account. And the reason was, and the reason is, that Poland is a state that fulfills the duties of NATO member states. And I only reminded because the whole debate and whole discussion that we are talking right now is about European states, allies of United States, taking care of our own security. And in a way, taking care of European security, of NATO security by the member states itself is the reason why we have the stance that you are talking about. Because we have, for example, Germany, a state that is protected by United States and roughly meets the criteria, actually doesn't meet the criteria needed by NATO. And this mood is related to the fury of various, and at least that's my view, of lots of American voters who are asking the questions that Charlie asked J.D. Vance. Go on.
Well, and I think even more than that, I don't want to get into the details of it because I think the main thing is in his response, we see that it's possible to make an argument to frustrated people in America that it does matter to care about other countries. Now, the question is which countries are the ones we need to focus on the most. But J.D. Vance is capable of making an argument to care about countries in Europe. So that's why I mean, what I'm looking for is opportunities to see where we can show the world that Ukraine matters. For example, J.D. Vance had a piece in the New York Times in April saying that Ukraine math is bad, that the Congress says Ukraine math is bad. Well, there's a truth to that. In the typical fashion of Washington, when they say they're spending $60 billion, it's not actually $60 billion. That money's not coming to Ukraine. Most of that stays in the U.S. And if Washington were honest, if the White House were honest about the money it's actually spending on Ukraine, then people might say, oh, this makes sense. We're benefiting from this. But because they're dishonest, it fuels the opposition to helping Ukraine. This is why there's so much unrest in America. And people like J.D. Vance, instead of explaining the truth to them, simply take advantage of that because it's easy to do politically. And so this is part of the complexities of what we're facing in this. And I think one thing that's very controversial and sure to get a lot of comments when this is posted online and maybe some unfollows, but here I am in Kyiv. I've been here for a couple of weeks, and almost everyone with whom I speak, whether they're high-level people in the military or low-level guys or taxi drivers or baristas, all kinds of people, there's one, as they look at what happens in America, more and more people are saying maybe things would be better with Trump because it can't get any worse with the current policy. And when you say this to Americans who support Ukraine, who've really done a lot to support Ukraine, many of them are upset because they think that Trump would be the absolute worst thing. But if you look closely at what the Biden administration policy is, I think many people in Ukraine in these very heavy days are recognizing that if that policy doesn't change, Ukraine is going to bleed out. And just look at what happened on the eve of the NATO summit. Russia had that absolutely targeted and brutal attack on Ukraine's top kids' cancer hospital. And the only way they could hit that, they had to know what they were doing, because Ukraine is pretty well protected. I mean, Kyiv is pretty well protected by the Patriot missile defense system. They had to specifically overwhelm that system with a higher level volume of missiles than usual. And why did they do this on the eve of the NATO attack? Since then, for more than 2 weeks, there's not been a major attack on Kyiv or any city far away from the front. Why did they do this on the eve of the NATO attack? At first, pro-Ukraine people thought, oh, this is going to inspire NATO. Even the media in Washington during the NATO summit they were pressing the White House and said, look at what the Russians did to the kids' hospital. Are you finally going to give Ukraine permission to hit the Russian bases from which Russia attacks Ukraine? And the White House said no. They said, no, we're not going to do it. We know they had all kinds of excuses about escalation, but it was abundantly clear that they weren't going to do it. I already knew this because if Mariupol is not going to move you to fight back, well, then one more attack in a hospital is not. And I think that the Russians knew exactly what they were doing. What they did is they further scared the West, the current leadership in the West, into submission. And so the key question is, as we're looking at who's going to be leading America, and you're looking at who's going to work for the people who are leading America, I think the best question to ask from the Ukraine perspective is, do you believe in victory? Because that doesn't mean anything. Will you give Ukraine permission to hit the Russian bases from which Russia attacks Ukraine? And if the answer is no, then we know we're going to just bleed out. If the answer is yes, well, then there's a possibility of real victory.
Joe, there is, and those are my views and my impressions. I know that probably lots of our, at least new users, might be surprised, but I never made a secret out of my conservative views. I'm a Polish conservative. I'm a Polish patriot, and I'm a man who strongly stands against the Russian aggression and Russian totalitarianism, which is the reason why I support Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion. But I'm also a big fan, and I'm also I also think that there is nothing as important from the standpoint of the Judeo-Christian civilization as transatlantic links between Europe and the United States. Having said this, I'm also a sovereignist. I think that states need their sovereignty. The nations need their sovereignty. So I understand that there is an issue regarding the outside presence of U.S. troops. But I'm worried in a way, because I remember and I know that because of Ronald Reagan policies, states like mine were liberated and the Cold War was won by the West. And it would never happen if politicians like Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher wouldn't be thinking about their security, their existence in the broader perspective, which meant freedom for my home country. I was born in 1978, which means I was 11 when communism collapsed. And I'm saying this because I've heard, being present in Milwaukee during the Republican National Convention, what was the absolutely huge applause and support for a man who is a great TV personality, Tucker Carlson, but men whose views on Russia, from my perspective, are very hard to accept. But in a way, I have to accept the fact that the people who were gathered in Milwaukee during the most important Republican political meeting were rooting and were screaming, supporting Tucker Carlson when he was addressing the crowd. He actually didn't present his views on Russia being a great state. Russia is not a great state and Russia is a tyranny. However, he mentioned and he addressed the support to Ukraine. And I was sitting in one of the suites with the people from Ukraine, and I saw their faces when they heard it. It wasn't a good and pleasant view. I wonder, what is your take on this?
Well, here's, I think, where, for those who support Ukraine, you first have to really listen to the mood in America, because America is the country that can unlock the firepower that Ukraine needs to win. And not even that. We see that at the NATO summit, Sir Keir Starmer, the new British Prime Minister, wanted to promise President Zelensky that he could use the Storm Shadow missiles however he wanted. And the next day, the British Foreign Office clarified and said, oh, we can't do it. Some country that we can't name, they says we can't do it. Well, we know what country that is. It's not Nigeria or Italy. We know it's the U.S. And so even with European-made weapons, the U.S. will not permit Ukraine to fight back. And see, but this detail gets missed, and the Russians know this, and so they're able to inflame the situation. So, if you're a hardworking American, with all kinds of information inputs, facing a lot of problems at home and a lot of frustrations, and you're looking at, you believed George W. with Iraq, and then you realize, that you think that that's now BS. And you're sick of being lied to from Washington about war. So understandably, when you hear Washington supporting another war, your inclination is to oppose it. And what the Russians have done via, through vehicles like Tucker Carlson, they have actually listened to the American mood and they manipulate it on all sides. So they go to religious Americans who, for example, listen to Tucker, and they say, Christians are being oppressed in Ukraine, which is a lie. They're actually, well, they are. They're being oppressed by Russians who are invading and attacking. And in Russian-occupied Ukraine, Christians are oppressed. But the Russians got to that audience before Ukraine did, because the elite media doesn't care about this topic, right? And so your average hardworking American, if they know Christians are being oppressed, for example, they'll do everything they can to support them. But the first people that told them this narrative were the false ones. It was Russia lying about it, and they were able to manipulate it. This is what they've done going back to Soviet times. And so what we have to do is sort of correct all this. But first, we have to understand that forget about the J.D. Vances and all that. Think about the people who they represent. What are their frustrations? And their frustrations are legitimate. And when they hear of $60 billion coming to Ukraine, and they look at the cities around them, they're like, it doesn't make sense to them. If you look at any Ukrainian city, is more peaceful and has greater social cohesion and less crime than cities around the world, and especially throughout America. And so right now, Americans see this as a negative. Why are we helping this country? But the reality is, Ukrainians have created, since the Revolution of Dignity, a model of how to live freely, of how to live in a real democracy where you can, restore your cities and have strong communities. And this is what is being erased by Russia. This last example on earth of how to really live in a radical democracy where the people are in charge and you can have a lovely society. That is being erased right now. And when Americans see that happening, when Americans see illegal immigrants coming to Poland or into Ireland or to Hungary, the same Americans who oppose Ukraine will stand with the Irish and the Hungarians and the Poles.
Yeah, but
for some reason, they don't realize that Russians with ballistic missiles are the worst form of illegal immigrants. And this is the conception we have to fix.
There is a back side of this story, because on one hand, I've heard people rooting for Tucker Carlson when he was president at RNC, but on the other hand, he made only one, not even that strong reference to Russian aggression on Ukraine. It was clearly a political decision to do it only once. But on the other hand, we've heard from the official statements of Donald Trump, of J.D. Vance in a way, a claim that it's hardly arguable. Donald Trump said that if he was a president in 2022, there would be no Russian invasion against Ukraine. We, of course, do not know what would have happened. We do not have an alternative reality to check it out. But we do know that when Donald Trump was the president of the United States, he decided to put American troops on the NATO eastern flank. He decided to build at least a couple of fundamental political decisions here in Central Europe that contained the Russian influence. He was the president of the United States who denied Germans and Russians right to start pumping gas through Nord Stream 2. It actually happened when Joe Biden was on duty. And people tend not to see those obvious things, my opinion is, through the lenses of the mainstream propaganda in all over the world, basically. And my point is that there is a good reason for which, during this presidential campaign, both conservative candidates claimed that this war would never have happened if they were on charge. I think that there is a reason for this, and this reason, I assume, is also a political reason in the United States. I wonder, what's your opinion on that?
Well, first off, I mean, J.D. Vance has said absolutely incorrect things about Ukraine. We went through, you can go to my Twitter, at JP Lindsley. We went line by line through his New York Times op-ed. Absolutely incorrect. But I think, first, it's very important to underscore, when President Biden made his resignation statement online, he talked about some of the things he wanted to claim as great successes. It was very telling. Michał, he never once mentioned Ukraine. So the world is on fire, and there's, you have from the Middle East to concerns about Taiwan, and then the biggest war in Europe since World War II. The President of the United States says he's not going to run for re-election, and in that letter, he never mentions Ukraine. And same when in his Oval Office address the other night. This is very disturbing and concerning, and it shows a complete lack of leadership. And I think it's everything that people here in Ukraine now have recognized, especially after that NATO summit. They thought, after that hospital attack, oh, surely this is going to be the last thing that wakes the West up, and we see zero desire to change the game and for Ukraine to win.
So, sorry, why? What is the reason for which he doesn't mention Ukraine? We could think that in some political context there are issues that we can point as Joe Biden's successes during this war. I mean, the first phase of the war was with the support of United States, of Great Britain, of Poland. Ukraine managed to throw out Ruskies out of vast part of their territories. They didn't succeed, but the thing that they managed to do was thanks to the support of US, Great Britain, and Poland and some other states. So what is the reason why for which Joe Biden doesn't mention it in such an important political statements?
Well, and a lot of it was due to Ukrainian work too. But look, Joe Biden could point to Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula, and the success in the Black Sea. And the U.S. has, in recent months, given Ukraine permission to hit targets in Crimea. And Ukrainians are doing extraordinary things. They're getting rid of Russian radar stations. Russia is forced to move so many of its assets away from the Crimean Peninsula. And this is a success. And if you cared about Ukrainian victory, you would proudly proclaim this. But then that would force you to take other steps. That would force you to say, what do we have to do next to win? And it's clear that they don't want to do that. The policy of Jake Sullivan and others, and that's why it's very important to examine what would Vice President Harris's policy be. In fact, in many ways, I think it would be better for the world if President Biden. This is just a scenario I have as a dream, that if President Biden resigned and gave a future President Harris a test period, and for the next few months, and see what she does. And then, in November, people could choose which way do we want to take things, because the world is on fire, and it's extremely important which team is leading the U.S. And we don't know. There's so many question marks about how President Harris would act. Also, there's question marks about how President Trump would conduct himself. And I think about 50% of the people who could work for Trump believe in Ukrainian victory. and the other 50% don't. And so right now, the big battle is happening behind the scenes to influence whoever would be president. And so it's very important to make the case, A, that when you give Ukraine tools and permission, it works. Two things happen. One, they get the job done. And two, Russia gets weaker. Russia is on the run in the Black Sea. There's no Russian ships in the Black Sea because it works when you can fight back. But as we saw yesterday, Kharkiv got the hell kicked out of it again yesterday. It was becoming safer for a while, but then the Russians had time to adapt after America gave the small, ability for Ukraine to fight back 100 kilometers over the border. Now Russians have readapted, and now they're beating the hell out of Kharkiv again. And Ukrainians have their hands tied behind their back. They cannot hit anything on Russian soil, deep into Russian soil, and they're attacked with impunity. So until that changes, and this was the question that the press was surprised by, but they really pushed this to the White House at the NATO summit, and the White House said they're afraid of escalation. And so it's very clear that that's the policy of the Biden camp. Will that be the policy of Harris? And when it comes to Trump, it's a big question mark. It's all about who's going to work for the president, which camp is going to influence him the most.
Just the bottom line is, and I always try to keep this in focus of our viewers, is that if United States decides to withdraw from the global influence on politics and geopolitics, it is going to be reduced to the status of Canada, and that will surely be felt by pockets and wallets of citizens of United States. Here in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, we'll feel it by the bullets flying over our borders and from Russian soldiers, but this will also influence well-being and money of United States, which is a global superpower right now, and which is a state that guarantees the world security after the Second World War. Joe, thank you very much again for your views on American politics straight from Kyiv. By the way,
next week.
We haven't seen each other for a while, so you have to add something about the fundraising and the way that we can support the Ukrainian resistance against Russian totalitarian oppression of Vladimir Putin's henchmen.
Well, while Ukraine continues to wait for the mythical F-16s, which I'm convinced are not showing up, I think President Zelensky revealed that he's convinced they're not showing up either. While we wait for the mythical F-16s, one of the best things we can do is get drones, both surveillance drones and FPV drones, to the guys at the front line. So we're continuing to do this. And our website is down. It's currently hacked, but you can follow me at JP Lindsley on X. And there you can find ways to donate and support the cause so we can continue to get drones to the guys to the front. That's what's holding the line while seeing how things might develop in Washington.
Joe Lindsley, thank you very much. Stay safe. We see each other pretty soon on Telewizja Republika on Rachon.
Dziękuję.
Dzięki. Ladies and gentlemen, you can join us on rachon.com. We haven't been uploading things for a while, but we just started over again, so feel free to leave us your email, drop us a line. We'll get back to you with our reports and our assessment of what is going on the front lines of the ongoing war against the Western civilization. Stay safe. We see each other next week. Probably we're gonna be back on Monday. Ciao.